Welcome to the Learning to Die podcast.
I'm Ian Dunican.
And I'm Ciaran O'Regan.
How do I live when I know I must die?
We explore areas of philosophy, psychology, martial arts, culture, existential risk, history, society, religion, science, and anything else that seems of interest and relevance to answering that question.
We can only hope that some of what we learn might be of benefit to you too. Namaste, sapiens. Welcome back to the Learning to Die podcast. Now, Ciaran, are you all right? No, I should always check on Ciaran before we start. Ciaran's all right. Today we have a very special episode because this is the first time we have, I suppose, a listener who's contacted us. A listener guest will be a fair way to describe it. We had an email about 10 days ago from a gentleman joining us today. If you're watching on video, you'll see Colin down there in the bottom, right down there. Ironically, I'm down there, I'm down under, and he's up there. But anyway, we might shuffle that around. Colin reached out to us. He wanted to talk about some personal experiences and had been listening to the podcast. So Colin, before we delve into your personal experiences, out of interest, how did you come across our podcast? Because we're only a few episodes in.
I had seen it. Someone sent me something on Instagram, and I kind of followed it from there. So yeah, it was interesting to see it, and what a great logo! I love that logo.
No, isn't that interesting? I do love that logo because I'm the same, and so is Ciaran. We are absolutely in love with that logo. And interesting,
that's a tattooable logo. You know?
That's right. The inspiration actually comes from this tattoo here, which is they got the Enso with a Buddha inside it with the two kanjis, peace and strength. But then the other part of the inspiration comes from Ciaran and reading, is it Montaigne with the skulls? Yeah. With the skulls. So we put the skull and the Enso together, and the lady who does my logo designs for my other business was like, it's fucking awesome. Even she was going, it's fucking awesome.
Yeah, I love it.
And the website it looks cool on the website as well. So maybe we'll have to get some t-shirts made, and hopefully our listeners will pitch in and buy some t-shirts because it would look pretty good on a t-shirt, I think.
It would look deadly, yeah.
So
sorry, I'm just trying to balance this thing up because my laptop is...
Maybe if Ciaran and I do 100 episodes, we'll get a tattoo, will we, Ciaran?
Forehead tattoos. Like forehead tattoos, but with UV ink. So that it's only when we're underneath UV lights and there's the Learning to Die logo on our foreheads.
Yeah, well, the only time to put UV lights on your head is if you're looking for some sort of bodily fluid, and I ain't doing that. So, Colin, for our lovely listeners today, can you tell us just a brief background of yourself, your age, where you're located in the world today?
Yeah, so I'm 42 currently, and I live in Clonmel, County Tipperary, which is Ireland. I'm a professional coach by my kind of how I make my living. I've owned a gym for more than 10 years. I've been coaching for 16 years. I've had a in-depth, I suppose, kind of interest in philosophy and martial arts for many, many years. And it's been a big part of my life. You know, it's been something that I've consciously cultivated for a long time. You know, so but I'm really, really interested in like the practical application of things. The only thing that matters to me and ever has is like, where's the rubber meet the road?
Yeah.
How does this make things better or different? You know, that has been the number one kind of I would say almost obsession or objective of my life, really. You know, is how do I change things internally and externally? That's been like every waking moment of my life, it seems to be, has been cultivating that, you know. So I'm a little bit of a self-obsessive in that way, in how we change, who we are, what we are. It's always been this very deep question for me, you know. It's just always been there.
Yeah. It's interesting you bring that up because that's kind of how Ciaran and I came to be doing a podcast was talking about these questions and some kind of side reading and crossing over, because obviously myself and Ciaran have got like science backgrounds, and we initially met through that forum of science. But then it was all these kind of peripheral or side conversations. And, you know, I had actually even considered, after finishing my PhD, potentially going back and studying philosophy. But then I was kind of, every time I read about studying philosophy, I was always a bit like, oh, a lot of people actually recommend that you don't, because then you get trapped in this kind of narrative or a dogma, and you just have to follow that kind of school of thought with philosophy. So that's one of the reasons why Ciaran and I started the podcast, was to do more self-exploration, and because there's so much you can read yourself, but I think these conversations are really important to have with someone else.
And the conversation is like the number one thing, I think.
Yeah.
You know, to be able to, because it's just like coaching, it's just like anything else. As we explain, as we explore it through this other paradigm, someone else's paradigm, you were learning more ourselves, you know, and people learn by teaching. You know, you really want to learn anything, teach it. It's the only way.
Yeah.
You know, it's a totally different road. And especially, like, same with martial arts, is the same with like philosophy. It can very easily become a subject. It can very easily become football. Yeah. And like, you know, we have to use words. We've got to expand, but we constantly have to remember and bring ourselves back to the fact that the more we do that, we bring ourselves away from it. It has to be a direct experience. It's all that matters. All that matters is what is the direct experience. And okay, we can talk and think about it, and that's how we process it and, you know, kind of integrate it. But we must constantly bring ourselves back to the fact that through language, we bring ourselves away from the direct experience. And that's the number one thing that, you know, gets lost, both physically and mentally, emotionally. It is like our mind, that's what it does. It turns things into this subject-object relationship. And that is not like, that's not philosophy. That's not, you know, that's not what we're talking about. What we're talking about is how do we directly experience something? And then how do we frame that? How do we feel about it? What does that mean to us? But you really have to kind of stop yourself constantly, all I do, consistently, to not becoming a subject. It's not an external factor. This is actually how I experience things, and now how do I process it? You know, and so the over study of things, even though like I read constantly, I've been studying for 20 plus years, but it's like in that process, can I understand the fact that I'm constantly trying to bring myself back to the root experience and reintegrate that, you know, and not get lost in the language. You know, it's really important. Like, to me, it's the fundamental thing. You know,
there's a book I'd highly recommend if you haven't heard of it before. It's called The Master and His Emissary by Ian McGilchrist. And a major premise, it would take a while to go through the big ideas in it, but a major premise is that this guy McGilchrist is a psychiatrist who initially was a professor of literature and poetry in Oxford. And then at like 27, 28, he realized that what they were doing in the study of poetry was taking something that was embodied and implicit and then making it disembodied and explicit by trying to interpret poetry in a formal deconstructive manner. And it was removing the experience of the poetry itself by trying to deconstruct it and break it down. And as a result, it was like fragmenting something, and it was like trying to make metaphor explicit instead of, because metaphor is a tool of communication. It's not just another way of saying something. It's an actual tool to impart a feeling or to impart an experience. It's not something that can be explicitly broken down and deconstructed in a way that it still retains its original value. So he basically took this, and he ended up going back to university to do medicine, and then ended up being a psychiatrist, and then got involved with hemispheric specialization in the brain. And basically, and this is why I think you might find it of particular interest, because his hypothesis, largely the way that the book towards the end finishes up, is along the lines of our civilization is basically fucked if we can't en masse relearn how to embody ourselves and how to re-engage with the implicit and how to stop categorizing and separating and fragmenting and seeing things in isolation outside of the whole. And he kind of traces it all the way back. And as an example, he kind of looks at the Enlightenment, and a key premise of the Enlightenment as it relates to knowledge is that, because a lot of the Enlightenment was pushback against religious dogma that couldn't have been questioned, because of inquisitions and so on, people getting burnt at stakes, etc. So a lot of the Enlightenment was focused on, well, a question isn't a question unless you can answer it. And then an answer isn't an answer unless you can understand it. And then an answer that you can understand doesn't even really matter if you can't transfer that knowledge. So it basically, the focus of the Enlightenment was based on around forms of knowledge that were answerable and transferable. But the most important things in life aren't answerable or articulable or transferable. Like, I can tell you about, we can bring up a Wikipedia page here and talk about the neurocorrelates and neurochemistry of the feeling of genuine companionship and love. But that's not but that's all very well and good, but that's not going to let someone know what it is like to love or be loved.
No, because it's a direct experience,
Yeah.
and this is what so much, and everything you spoke there is like that. Like, if you look at original Zen, the Chinese version of Zen, where it starts like Chen, and if you look at it, there's a brilliant book, the kind of original kind of text of Zen is called the what's that monk's name? Lin Chi. Lin Chi was like one of the original kind of Zen monks, and it's called the Lin Chi Lu, and it's basically his transcripts, and it's just him shouting and hitting people. Like, that's like, he just like shit. Like, you talk about this, like, it reminds me of my teacher. Like, he just had these fierce eyes, and you talk about this monk with these like fierce eyes, and he would just like shout at people and hit them with sticks when they asked him stupid things. It's like, no, that's not it. There's an urgency. You're hiding from the experience. You're afraid of the experience, and he'd smack them. And that was like the real Chinese way of doing it. And it worked a lot of the time. But it's like, again, no, stop trying to understand it, directly experience it, and don't be afraid of that, and for that, there requires no judgment, there requires the acknowledgement that you're afraid, and it requires a deep honesty, in everything I've experienced, everything I've read, everything people spend so long trying to be spiritual or trying to be, it's just nonsense. Because what's needed is a deep honesty, a real deep honesty. And that's what, I was taken from, if you read about Zen or any of the Stoic stuff. If we have a foundation of real deep internal honesty, all of that is easier. If I can come from a place where I know I'm afraid, I know I'm selfish, I know these things, I can change that. But if I'm constantly avoiding that subject, then I want something to distract me, and I see it all. Again, people practice, and the point of qigong, the point of meditation, it's not to change who you are; it's to understand where you are at that moment, understand you're afraid, understand you're tense, understand you're distracted, you're angry, and not move away from it. Like, that takes such discipline. Because then we can change it. But if we're always we have some projection, and we have that was the right thing, that was the right feeling, that was the right way, but it's gone now. If we search for that, we're missing what's there, and that needs to be the real practice, and that's a subtle thing, because we're always building these images, we're always building those ideas, and the central thing that, most Buddhists don't talk about, if you read a lot of Buddhist stuff that's done in the past, the number one thing, there's a tendency, like, if you find the Buddha, kill him. You never hear Buddhists talk. You never hear people.
I love that saying.
That's all that matters. That's everything. That's all of Buddhism right there. Because meeting the Buddha, that is meeting your interpretation. That's meeting yourself. If I'm the teacher, I'm the great coach, I'm the whatever, that construct, fucking kill it, tear it apart.
But Colin, that's exactly. It's funny enough. Like, talk about synchronicity by Carl Jung, Ciaran. Before I came on this call, I was reading about Zen Buddhism, and today I listened to 2 Dharma talks on Zen Buddhism, and I was watching a documentary on Zen Buddhism this evening. So it's quite weird that you bring it up, because that's exactly one of the things that they say in Zen Buddhism. And I've looked at I haven't looked at much Zen Buddhism, but the last couple of weeks I've been coming a little bit more drawn to it for some reason. And that's exactly what they talk about. Exactly to your points as well, Colin, is about basically that we are the Buddha within. We don't need any external factors. We don't need any external things. And it made me actually think about how we grew up in Ireland. And Colin, you're on the same age as me. And so you remember, and Ciaran, I'm sure you had the same experiences, the kind of the dogma of the Catholic Church, right, or any religion. And I think what they do is they provide a framework for people to follow steps. It's like going, we were talking off air before this about CrossFit and going to the gym and whatever, and adding 5 kilos to a 22-year-old snatch. That didn't sound right.
Olympic lifting
and snatch, yeah. And so I think it's the same thing, that people just don't want to think about, how they are as a person or what they are. They want to just follow a set of kind of rules or steps and not think about it. And it serves everybody really nicely to, follow those pathways. But I've been thinking on that same point, I've been thinking lately, because I interviewed a psychedelic researcher last week, and I've been looking at psychedelics a lot as well. And I actually think maybe if people did more psychedelics and more philosophy, that we might actually be fucked. And I don't mean fucked in a bad way, I mean fucked in a good way, because I think people would just not buy into the narratives of all these social constructs that we have. I think we'd be in a very different space. We might all just be walking around into trees and we might be having a great time, but it might be very different. So yeah.
You see, some people we need structure. This is the thing, right? Like we need something, to believe in. I think we are just built for belief. And everything I've ever encountered, and bringing myself deeper into my own understanding of things and my own how I acted, how I am, it's based on belief. And we need, because we're unconsciously believing things, but we need, until you have a certain fluidity of mind, like structure is really important, but the difference is, can we understand it as structure when we're doing it?
Yeah.
That's the difference, right? And a conscious understanding and conscious following up, here's why we're doing this. Yeah, look, here's why we're going to church. Because, for us, the community, and we're together, and we're thinking, we're talking. It's not about somebody fucking blessing me from the heavens, like don't treat me like a child. But you don't trust people to consciously engage with structure, because they need it. Yeah, the gym provides it, training provides it. It provides. We need. Look what COVID did to most people. Like, their heads just blew up.
Yeah.
Because they couldn't go to the gym I go to the gym at 5 o'clock every day, and that's what I do. They didn't train in 2 years. Like, what the fuck? So we need structure, but we need to understand the fact that we're using structure. That's a very different experience.
Yeah.
And the same external thing, but then there's no self invested in the external thing. That's different again. Yeah. So there's different layers to that, but we need structure. Most people I know need structure. They need more structure. And that's why, through every kind of psychological, Jungism down to logotherapy, whatever, all psychology has an effect. And it's not like one is better than the other, because some structure is better than no structure for most people, But then it's like, am I now reliant on that external structure? Is that the only thing I have, or has it been like a stepping stone, or is that applicable in some ways for some people? I need some kinds of structure, but I understand how really, really bad I am at it. Like, if it wasn't for my wife, I'd be homeless. I just, when it comes to the logistics of life, like paying my phone bill and paying them, I am shocking at that shit. Like, it just never, someone could owe me 10 grand, I wouldn't know. You know, my wife has to make sure like people are paying me, because like it just literally is the last thing on my mind, you know. Yeah. But yes, that lack of discipline and me understanding I need structure caused me problems. Then I owned a tax man 10 grand, you know, and I go, oh shit, how did that happen? You know? So like there's like these, both can coexist, you know. I can, and I understand that. I can understand that now. Before I resisted it. Now I understand that I can have certain structures in one way, but not in another way. You know, I don't have to internalize those structures. Let's put it that way, you know, because that's not how my mind works. You know?
And Ciaran and I have spoken about this before and the classic example I always go is like, in my work, I'm very structured. And it's very kind of science and engineering disciplined. But when it comes to martial arts, I'm very unstructured. I don't like classes. I don't like because that's my creativity at that time, you know. So but other people, they might work in a job where, and this is just an example, they might work in a job where it's a factory, or it might be a student. And then when they go to jiu-jitsu, they're just like, they want structure at jiu-jitsu because it might be different for them. They might be younger. They might want something else out of it. So it depends on a whole host of factors.
Yeah, but I think if we can just engage with it, that's the thing, you know.
Yeah, and I think you made up a great point there on, was about knowing who you are. I think too many people, you hit another interesting point there about like meditation and mindfulness, and I've spoken about this on another podcast, is that I think people are using these things as a surrogate for mental health. And it's really interesting to watch in corporations or in groups. Oh, Ciaran, you know, you seem a bit unhappy lately. You should be more mindful and be more thankful. It's like, fuck off. Like,
fuck all the way off.
Yeah, like maybe Ciaran's just a grumpy bastard and that's the way he wants to be. But he knows he's a grumpy bastard. But the problem is, you see, people don't like when you know yourself. So if Ciaran turned around and said to me, I'm just a grumpy bastard, leave me alone. I want to be left alone. People are like, ooh, what's wrong with him? In actual fact, Ciaran knows who he is. But people don't like it when you know who you are. People don't like it when you're sure of your own strengths, weaknesses, and limitations. And so, and that's a bit of a problem. I think people are using meditation, mindfulness, and maybe even elements of philosophy and psychology to try to chip away at people, to change them, to suit their narrative in a group. And I think it's really, really dangerous.
And like, it's lip service, you know, because I was the wellness provider for Murrow Shop and Dome for 5-6 years. We were doing what we're doing a long time. You know, we were involved in corporate kind of wellness nonsense at the beginning, you know, I don't know, 10 years ago, 8 years ago, something like that. And working with schools and that kind of stuff as well, bringing, you know, functional type movements into schools. Like, again, our first program was like 8 or 9 years ago. But when it comes to the corporate stuff, it's just completely, and I've trained like the CEOs of those companies. I still train a woman who's like in a global role of, you know, training and different components of it. And it's all bullshit. It's all complete shit, because like we'll play a lip service to it, so we don't have to do the real work. You know, we don't have to actually make changes. We don't actually have to care about you, because we're saying, here's the badge, and look, you did your 10 minutes of that today. Now get the fuck on with it. Work 24 hours and just trying to die before it's finished. You know, it's complete nonsense. You know, because there's no ownership, there's no responsibility there. You know. Yeah, you have that constantly. Sorry.
I was just going to say that you have that so much of the lip service in the modern kind of zeitgeist, in terms of just essentially like political correctness on steroids, is essentially corporations paying lip service so that people won't acknowledge the fact that they're using slave labor from Uyghur Muslims in China for producing their gear or whatever, you know. Yeah. So it's like, or that they're destroying vast swaths of the Congo to harvest certain minerals or whatever, you know. So like, there's an awareness that if we just act like we're really nice up here and we give a shit about racism or whatever, then they won't have a look at the fact what we're getting on behind the scenes.
Make as much noise in the wrong direction. I mean, it's beautiful strategy, you know. It's martial arts. Like, look over here, bang.
Deception. You're right.
You know, look at what my left hand's doing. Look at my left hand doing. Bang, you know?
Colin, you're gonna love our future episodes. We got a lot of episodes in the bank already on Miyamoto Musashi and the Book of Five Rings. We talk about this, so that's a great tee up for that one.
And you know, and like you have to understand that's going on all the time. You know, and again, it's just a bigger version of what's going on with you, a person. You know, and you know, it's people. Yeah, like you have to understand. I don't know. Like my dad died 7-8 years ago, something like that. And you know, typical Irish father, but like this incredibly hardworking guy. It's like he was just a monster. But like I didn't really know the man until he died. You know, until I really examined, you know, who he was and how he was and how similar I am to him. And, you know, I didn't understand how much, you know, the everyday person, you know, because look, I'm still young and stupid in some ways, how much real responsibility we have to take on, you know, and how if you don't have the language to do it, you know, it's much harder. If you don't have the emotional range, the emotional language to do it, you come up with all these really messed up, but at the time functional ways of dealing with it, right? And then like by understanding him and our dynamic, and you know, one became much more forgiving, but I also understood that in the kind of both the macro and the micro, into how that just expands out in families and people. And you know, Krishnamurti says it beautifully, you know, if you know yourself, you know the world, you know. And he's totally, you know, it's so accurate. You know, if you really deeply understand the nature of a relationship, like that is there in most relationships, and you can expand that up and down, you know. And by doing that work with when that happened with him, you know, it's helped me be better. It's helped me understand how I am as a father and what I want to bring to the table as a father, you know. But it is that that can be scaled up or down, you know. But that was my kind of tool for learning about that, you know. And it was my tool for what I just spoke about before too, with that empathizing with the other to understand them more. You know, that I learned more from that experience internally, and that made me a better teacher and coach than almost anything, I would say, you know, outside, let's say, the direct things that happened the past few years, you know.
So
Could I add to that question really? Could I add to that question just a little question to that briefly for those of us who have parents who are still alive? Would you have any advice based on things that you realized that you could have asked or could have explored, or would you have any advice based on having had that experience yourself and thought about it?
Yeah, I think like my mother is still alive, and my mother is one of the most difficult human beings I've ever encountered in my entire life. Right? Like I have been through a lot in the past few years, and like I'm reasonably skilled in some capacities. It takes every ounce of my attention and focus to like bring it to bear on my mom, right? Because I have to try and understand who she is first, you know, and understand her the limits of her language. You know, this is you really have to get into how it feels. Like my mother's a very negative person. That's her language. That's her, like, this is a perfect example, right? So after the first time I had the massive heart attack and I died, right? 9 days later, I had another massive heart attack here in the gym. And like I hung on by a thread, right? They rushed, eventually got an ambulance, got me to hospital. I'm in the intensive care ward, right? I'm hooked up to all these, you know, machines, everything. I'm lying there. And I deliberately told my wife, Karen, not to tell my mother. And somehow, anyway, she found out. She comes up to the hospital, right? I'm lying there now, right? There's all these dying people around me. I'm lying there. And she comes in and goes, "You have some fright. oh my God, you're a brother to take time off work and everything. And I'm like, I go, right? And I'm like, and I stood up in bed and going, are you fucking serious? What the hell is going on? And like, I was quite reactive then because like, you know, I had just been to hell and back, right?
Literally.
But literally, right? But the difference is, right? I never leave things as they are. I always think it through. In that moment, she didn't have the language to expand on Jesus. Look, here's my son hooked up to all these wires. He's nearly after dying again. She didn't have the language to express that or even consciously go there. She was too scared to go there. So that was her response, was to deflect it, right? So
that's
if
the
I
coping
take that,
mechanism.
that's her language. That's the way she copes, right? So if I was to just take that on, she doesn't fucking give a shit. Oh my God, I'm dying here. And that's what she's talking about. Or I can take that, I can empathize, look at the framework and go, no, look, that's her panicking. That's her being afraid. That's her almost in this childlike state of not having the language to express what's going on. Now I understand her more. But it takes conscious effort to do that. You know, it's not something that comes naturally. Because we expect the mother to be the one that's, you know, I'm a parent, I have 3 kids. I have to be the more mature one, right? But that's not always the case. All right. So just because she like does that all the time, that's just a classic example, right? And when I have the space and time, which is a lot more than I used to, I can understand her more. And then I can be with her as she is. I don't want her to change. I can't change. She's 71. She's not going to change. I can be with her as she is. I can have a different experience. Yeah. But I have to put the time and energy in to understanding her first. You know, I have to take charge of that process. Not everyone does that all the time. Okay. I've practiced that a lot in my work, you know, but then I don't want her to change. I can be with her as she is. And I can accept her for who she is, and I can be there more present and more directed, you know. But that does take effort, you know. But that time, that's the best example, you know, of her.
That's lovely.
So Colin, that's a nice segue into one of the reasons you contacted us last week was you spoke about these number of near-death experiences you had. So with the first heart attack you had, can you tell us about, you know, basically what it was like, and you know, what did you see? What did you not see? Like, we hear all these things. And one of the reasons I'm asking some of these questions is because I've read this book before, and then, which I'm going to put up here, which is called Evidence of the Afterlife, which is by a guy called Jeffrey Long. And he's a medical doctor, and he started constructing a database back in I think the 90s, an online database of people recording near-death experiences and what they saw. And so he summarized his findings to date in this book here called Evidence of the Afterlife. So it's quite interesting. So when you contacted me last week, I went back to my shelf and pulled it off and was like, read most of it on the weekend again. I was like, man, there's some interesting things in here that I really wanted to ask you about, you know. So can you just give us a bit of an overview of what you saw, what you didn't see, or any sort of demons that are out there looking for me and Ciaran because we won't be ready?
Yeah, well, like, so 3 years ago on April Fool's Day, Easter Sunday, which was quite ironic, I thought. So like,
what a great day!
The fact that it was Easter Sunday or April.
What a great day for the resurrection, though. Easter Sunday.
Yeah, that's it.
The day,
or was it because it was April Fool's Day?
It was more the Easter Sunday thing. I thought it was like, you know, that was like, I hit the nail on the head nicely there, you know.
Around the hands.
Around the hands, yeah. So like, it was just this, again, normal, like I'm really, you know, I've been training my entire life. When I got sick, you know, I was in the absolute peak of physical health. You know, I was super, you know, I was training twice a day. I was very strong. And I have a good friend of mine that I've been training for many years. We actually grew up together. And every Sunday, so I live on Slievenman, which is this really big mountain, the highest mountain in Tipperary. And I live on that mountain. And there's many tracks, but there's one particular road me and JP go up. And I was just jogging, got up, normal Sunday stuff. I'm up early, have a cup of coffee, talk to the kids. Honey, I'll see you later on. And I go up, and then we're going up this path. We've been up literally 1,000 times at a slow pace, a totally conversational zone 2 kind of pace. And there's this bloody big hill. And I'm jogging up this hill. And the last thing I say is, which in retrospect is like some of the worst last words ever, or like, this bloody hill's going on forever. And that's it. I dropped dead. And everything stopped. My heart stopped. My breathing stopped. I hit the ground. And then I was completely not breathing and everything. Gone blue. My lips were a different color. It was kind of some kind of foam in my mouth or something. For over 3 minutes. And all the time John Paul is there, doesn't know, again, this whole thing had the biggest impact, had this really massive impact on everybody. If you knew me and you were to run like a lotto, who's the one person who's never nothing's going to happen? I don't drink, I don't smoke. I'm 80 something, 86, 88 kilos of solid muscle. I've been, I got my shit dialed in, not in a run myself to death way, and my sleep is dialed in, my diet was perfect. I get blood work done, I've got a fucking, everything is on point,
Yeah.
And then I was just gone, and so for 3 minutes, something like that, I was totally gone. Then JP, again, so weird. I never bring my phone because I've got, it's a big phone. I brought the phone that day, and JP didn't have a phone either. And he didn't know my passcode. So he quickly thought my thumbprint. So he opened my phone with my thumb, and he rang my wife, and he rang an ambulance. But I guess in the middle of nowhere, in relative terms. And I was totally then unconscious for another 20 minutes or something, 20, 30 minutes. And then, so the whole thing, that was there was nothing, right? It was just this nothingness. But then I felt myself come back to life. I don't know that I didn't feel myself breathe again because I was totally unconscious at that point. But I felt myself come back to life. And, it was not this I'm floating on my body kind of thing. It was literally being born again, this deep gut thrill. I felt myself rise up through my body, and not come into my body, rise up through my body. And I could see thinking, I could feel, it was rushing at me. And I effectively kind of woke up in a way. I kind of was ugh, and I made this groaning, moaning, kind of noise. And I couldn't see, I couldn't move my legs. I was like a newborn lamb or something. I couldn't move my legs, And John Paul, and I was JP, I was calling. And he said, holy fuck. And because he didn't know CPR or anything, he just turned me on my side, and I was just lying there, stone cold. And then this is all just coming back to me. It was obviously about 15 liters of adrenaline pumping through my body, And I was sitting up then, I couldn't see, I couldn't move my arms, couldn't move my legs. And I felt just things start to flicker and twitch, and then I was able to stand up. And as soon as I could stand up, I felt fine. He said, what the hell? I was like, I'm okay. Where am I? What the hell? And he goes, what the fuck? You've been there. And like, he was just white as a ghost, and he said, the ambulance is on. I was like, I'm fine. There's no what, I don't know, And so I walk off the mountain with him. First of all, my hand around his neck. And then, I'm walking and it's like someone just hit me with a hammer, it's just like, oof. And all these broken blood vessels on my face. It looked like I've been hit a lot, all around my eyes, my nose, and everything was all really broke up.
From the fall or from the heart attack?
No, just from the pressure.
From the pressure?
Yeah, just from the pressure. It's called an MI, so it's like a myocardial infarction. Turns out that I have cardiomyopathy, which is this genetic heart condition that my mother has, and my grandmother died of it. But I had some kind of low-level infection that had made its way to my heart, and in cardiomyopathy, in the form I have, the septum, so the very center of the heart around both sides, that's bigger and swelled, and then my heart had become inflamed from the infection. So and then it just blew up. It was a massive cardiac arrest. And I'd been training. The Friday, that was Sunday morning. The Friday before that, I was training. I didn't feel good. I felt under pressure. I felt out of breath. But I didn't feel disproportionate. There's nothing, massively stuck out. And then I went down, met the ambulance had just arrived. They brought me to hospital. And some of my clients are hospital consultants. Two of them are actually doctors in the hospital. So, and none of them were on that day, but I contacted them both that day, and I said, "Hey, look, something's really after going astray." Sorry,
back in again.
I thought you died again. Sorry. You fucking frightened the shit out of me.
Fuck. And I ended up going to hospital that day, and I signed myself out of hospital. I was just like, okay, look, I'm fine. To hell with this, get me out of here, and the more the day went on, it's the most indescribable, horrible feeling. Everything, everything hurt. Everything. There's no way to describe how much my body ached, and I felt really, really bad. But so that week, I going to bed that night, I could feel it. I talked to Karen. I said, "Honey, and that night was the first time we had this conversation. We've had it maybe 100 times since. It's like, look, it's really important. I'm just a really practical kind of person. I start talking the logistics. If I'm dead, what happens? And I slept, and then I slept okay, in relative terms, but like I could do nothing but lie on the sofa the next couple of days, and I went back into hospital, met my clients who kind of took charge of things, pushed me through all kinds of scans and, MRIs on my brain and everything. And then they discovered, what had happened to my heart. And they were all just kind of amazed that one, I had recovered, like resuscitated, and two, that I was walking around, because that happens to most people. If they survive, like they're in hospital for a week or 2 weeks or something, and I was walking around relatively. Like I said, look, I literally felt like get warmed up, but I could function, So then I was sent straight down to Cork Hospital, which is a more specialised hospital, to meet a consultant there. And they gave me all sorts of tests, and they gave me a mild kind of stress test where they put me on a treadmill, kind of running or walking, which in retrospect was not a good idea. And then so let's say about a week passed, but that was actually the most dangerous week in a way, because like a big part of the lateral wall of the left ventricle was in spasm. It was all locked. So my heart could have stopped at any time, And every single night I went to bed that night, that week, like I didn't know I was going to wake up. Like I didn't feel like I was going to wake up, you know. And I've got 3 beautiful children. My little boy was only barely 1.5 at the time. That weighed very heavily on my mind, you know, that I wouldn't be there for the kids. You know, that was the biggest thing. And you know, it's very interesting. Like you only know, and that's why, even though as hard as the past 3 years have been, and you know, I'm not going to live to be an old man, more than likely. I wouldn't change it. You know, I wouldn't trade it. I prefer to have 5 years as I am now than like 20 years. I mean, how I was even. Yeah, because I'm like a different man walked off the mountain. You know, a different person walked off. You know, because it was like this kind of reset. There's like someone's like wiped the hard drive. You know, but the second time it happened was here in the gym. I was here on my own, and that was like 7 or 8 days later. And I was here on my own. I wasn't doing anything. I'm a real kind of tidy freak. I'm always organizing things and tidying things. And I was down in the back of the gym, and you know, all of a sudden I was doing something. I just felt this drop. It was like, shit. The very second it happened, I had this emotional memory of it happening on the mountain, even though at the time I hadn't felt it. So I had this like instant feeling. And my body knew. I went, oh, fuck. And I turned around to try and move, and I couldn't move my legs. And so I've been training my entire life, you know, in a very particular martial art. And my teacher was a very, very skilled man. And at the higher levels in what we do, my teacher many, many times brought me to the point of unconsciousness. He was such a sneaky old guy. He'd be training, he'd be demonstrating, and all of a sudden he'd change the movement. He'd do something, bang, and you just drop nearly unconscious, right? And he'd go, "Oh, you okay?" Like as if he didn't know, and then he'd go sit down, and you'd kind of like, "Oh fuck," you know, and you try and gather yourself, and you'd kneel down at the side of the mat and see that. And you'd breathe and try and stay conscious. You're literally on the edge of like, you know, being unconscious. And he was seeing, you know, over and over, could he like acclimatize you to, you know, can you get that badly hurt or hit and stay alive? Can you stay focused? And he'd done this to me many, many times. And so again, instinctively, I turned and I couldn't move my body, and everything was like, I could feel myself blacking out. And I just dropped to my knees and went in the Caesar, and I started breathing and trying to control my heart rate, and trying to stay conscious. And I was thought, okay, look, I can slow this down. Oh, and I couldn't. My heart was just beating on my chest, like pressure in your head is unbelievable. So I said, my phone was at the end of the gym, which is maybe like 30, 40 feet away. I was like, fuck. And I get up, and I shout at the top of my voice, no. I'm shouting at myself to stay conscious. And every second step, I can feel my blood pressure drop, and I'm going to pass out, shouting at myself. And so I hovered in this. It must have taken me like 2 minutes to walk that 30 feet, you know. I got to my phone, and I was like, I sat down. Whoa. And I was able to ring my wife. And ring a client of mine who was a paramedic who was nearby. And he got to the gym before the ambulance. But that went on, that whole experience, that whole thing of like nearly passing out, my heart nearly stopping, went on for about 20, 25 minutes, you know. And then they rushed me to the hospital, and I met my mother that night. So I'd experienced that day, and then I was rushed to Cork, and I was in the cardiac intensive care unit for like 2 weeks or something before they operated. They put in a defibrillator and a pacemaker into my body. But yeah, that was the first kind of period, you know. So That's a long way of saying I didn't see any light or anything. But like there was no direct experience, but as time went on, as time has gone on, much more of the sense of it has come to me. Much more of my perception of time has drastically changed, and it's taken me a long time to reorientate myself in the world. My perception of time, my perception of how I feel, and everything is different.
So Colin, there was no, like you said, just because in this book, right? And I just summarized some of these things, and I've heard of them, and Ciaran's probably heard of them as well. You had none of these NDEs that people talk about. You had none of the, your life flashes before your eyes, the bright light, the out of body experience. You had none of that. Seeing past family members or anything of that.
No, there is a really deep. You're again, it's non-verbal. With whatever part of my brain, soul, spirit, whatever you want to call it, it deeply experienced the nothingness of not being alive. Yeah. And again, maybe it's a cultural interpretation thing or something. I don't know. Or maybe it's me. I didn't experience fear. I didn't experience anything like that.
Was there any sense of warmth, coldness? Did it feel natural to you? Did it feel unnatural?
Well, I certainly have no fear. I'm certainly not like I'm not afraid of dying. I'm not in the slightest afraid of. I'm not afraid of not experiencing more. Does that make sense? Like there's no desire in me for a more personal experience. I don't know if that makes sense. Like I'm really, really happy, but I was kind of happy anyway. Like I don't have a desire for more. Yeah, there's no want in me.
Yeah.
The only my main driver and why I want to be alive is for my kids and my wife. I have no desire for more living experience. I'm deeply, deeply at peace with that.
Do you think
maybe that's a direct experience?
Do you think it might be akin to falling asleep? Like some nights some people fall asleep and they go straight into like a crazy dream, right? Or some nights some people go to sleep and then they don't have anything, and then they go into this, halfway through the night they go into a crazy dream, or some nights they have a crazy dream. Do you think maybe you got to step 1 of the death process and there's 10 steps, you didn't even get near step 2 maybe because you had that will to power?
Yeah, maybe, but I was definitely not here for a period of time. And again, maybe it's how I process things too. Maybe it's a deeply personal thing. But I have definitely, there's a felt understanding, and there is a sense. I've been again. Those direct experiences just take longer to process. Maybe it's taken me a number of years to really process it. And I do have that. I can feel it now. Seeing it is the wrong way to describe it because it's non-visual, it's non-verbal.
Yeah.
But I feel it now. And we're in such a rush all the time. People generally they live in a hurry. You're only rushing towards nothingness. You're rushing towards death.
That's fucking gold. I'm gonna write that down. You're rushing towards nothingness.
That's the name of the podcast.
That's the name of this episode. Exactly, Ciaran. Yeah.
Because this is where we are, whatever kind of level things are on. This is a place of stuff. Where it's of experience, it's of feeling and what we're talking about. But there is another place or another way that is nothingness. Nothing is there. There's no experience. There's no. Everything is fluid. And that's really hard for us to understand because we're constantly trying to project onto that so I can understand it.
Yeah, and I think this is. I've been reading some stuff on Descartes recently, who, this kind of, who's, basically the founder of this Cartesian world or science as we have it today, and where things are very objective and measurable and everything can be explained by science. And, he is the founding father of the modern scientific approach. But part of that is we've thrown out, and me and Ciaran have spoken about this before, but we've thrown out the eros, if you want to use Jung's language and these other guys. We've thrown out the felt, the emotion, what you're saying. We can't quantify what happened to you. So people will roll their eyes and go, oh, it's just bullshit. Like, it's just something that came up, or, until we measure it, we can't explain it. There's too much kind of emphasis on the measurement. But what you're talking about is exactly what you're talking about at the start of the podcast. Is it's a lived experience. It's how you feel. It's how you interpret it. And maybe that's how you interpret it for you. And maybe when me and Ciaran die, it'll be different. Who knows?
And I think
it'll all be
who knows? And that's why I don't. Again, it wasn't just that time. There's been these other events that I've been, and then just the day before they operated on me in hospital, the wheels come off like savagely, and my whole body was just shutting down, and I couldn't move my legs, my hands. Like, I started to lose the ability to talk. I couldn't move my tongue, and that went on for like about 10 hours. Yeah, so I'm slowly dying, and like coming back up, and like I seem quite immune to the whole dying process. Keeps just like bringing me back up.
You must be vaccinated.
Totally vaccinated.
Vaccinated for death.
But again, in retrospect, because it takes time to process. I've never been afraid. Yeah, this is that understanding of not wanting more. It came to me after that. I was like, I've never felt, and maybe because people ask me to, like, I've never felt fear in it, and, in retrospect, I understand that, it's because I spent my whole life, trying to do things the way I thought was the right thing, not the way someone showed me, not the way I was raised. I spent like how my kids have grown up. It couldn't be more different to how I grew up. How I live and have lived couldn't be more different to how my family live, or my generationally. And it's because I think in those moments I was at peace, because I know I had done my best. I know I had, my wife knows how I feel. My kids know that I love them. They know that I work for them in everything I do. Those things weren't left unsaid. Things weren't left undone. And I think there was an underlying piece from that I just didn't know was there. But that's what I took from that, because again, when I after I was started to get sick, like that whole period, like I really felt I had failed massively. I really genuinely felt like this is what I do, for fuck's sake, and I felt like I had failed, because look what happened, and I felt like I'd let everyone. I felt like I let my wife down, my kids down. I had my teacher. I didn't meet my teacher until he was old then. He was in his 60s. And I trained that man until he was in his 80s. He's like a lion in his 80s, And it's like, that was my model for aging. You're still a complete badass at 70 something. Like, at a 3rd, 4th level black belt, my teacher would bounce me off the walls at 80. It wouldn't cost. I would have no chance. Like, that was my example of aging. And that was my model for life, was like just to become more and more like that. So I felt I'd really failed, and again, it was sitting with it, it was analyzing it, it was thinking about it, and then it was like, actually, no, look, I'm still alive. So like, I was preparing for this test, and I passed it, So everything I had done had prepared me for it, If like philosophy is training for life, the first half of my life was all training for this period. Everything mentally, emotionally, physically. So what's happened in the past few years, like, it's taken every ounce of my mind and body to be able to do it, like there's nowhere to hide. You know, when you are in that moment, like you know who you are. Like there is nothing else, like, you know. And in knowing that, I was at peace. In knowing that, I was happy. You know.
So Colin, since this has happened, I'm not sure what your views were on religion or God beforehand, but since it's happened, has it changed your views on, you know, the presence of, and I use the word God collectively, not in the sense of Irish Catholic, like bow down God, but do you feel like there is we'll use Star Wars terminology even, do you feel like there's a life force? The force. Like, do you feel there is a force, a Tao, a Tao? What do you think? You do?
Yeah, no, I again, not much has changed in that sense before. Like I've studied religion and religions my entire life, you know. Like I was first introduced to Alan Watts, like when I was about 20 years of age. And I love Alan Watts. Alan Watts is just beautiful.
He's
like
brilliant.
Such beautiful stuff. And, you know,
and it feels like, do you know what it's interesting about Alan Watts? Sorry, just on that. It feels like no matter which Alan Watts talk you listen to at whatever time, that he's talking to you at that present time in your 100%. Life. It's the fucking weirdest stuff. It's mental. Man, it's like he's talking directly to you in your own.
And, you know, I listened to every, like, back when it was a tape and a Walkman, and like I was in work with that on, you know, and thinking about it and looking at it, because I always had this felt sense, you know, of something, you know, there. And my family is not religious by a long shot. I'd say I've been to church twice or something, but that was always kind of in my, you know, that's been a burning question, has always been there for me, you know. But I always understood also that what we were presented with wasn't it, you know, that structure, that dogma wasn't it, you know. So yeah, I've always, since that's happened now the past few years, I can, nothing I could, this is a very strange feeling and a strange sensation. It's something that's taken me a long time in the process. Like, you know, nothing I did made it happen, and nothing I could have done could have stopped it. So it could have brought me back, right? I was completely out of the equation. And if you really sit with that and really deeply sit with that, like that's quite something, right? There's no sense of I in that. I couldn't have stopped it. I didn't bring me back. Yeah. There's something behind that. Yeah. And like this kind of chronic sense of tension we all have internally, like that is associated with my sense of myself, you know, that's not really there anymore. I have vast periods where I don't feel that.
Really?
I feel it sometimes. Yeah. I don't feel that anymore. You know, there's a really...
Do you feel kind of, you know, to use the word Zen, do you feel kind of Zen, enlightened, walking around? Do you feel like Teflon, like shit just flowing off you, that you don't get half as upset anymore? You don't really give a fuck.
Yeah, things don't really bother me, right? But I still get, like, look, I work for myself. I've got 3 kids. I've got dogs and chickens and a wife and the logistics of life, right?
Yeah.
But like, I feel it in my mind, but I don't feel it in my heart. You know, it's not in me. It's not in my body. You know, when I'm like, oh, fuck this, or I'm tired, or, you know, my kids are they're beautiful and wonderful, and they're just like sometimes melt to your mind, you know. I'm like, oh, just shut up. But it's really just in my mind. I don't feel it. You know, it's not in my heart, you know. And that's the way it is with 99% of things. Very few things really. And then even like, I think, look, I should be really pissed off about this. I think I should be.
Yeah.
But I'm not, you know, like I'm not, you know. It comes and goes. There's times when nothing, like you could shoot me and it wouldn't bother me. it comes and it goes, you know.
Yeah.
It's like, you know, my teacher described it beautifully before. It's like the river in summer or the river in winter, you know. And that's like, sometimes it's there, sometimes it's not, and that's okay, you know. It's different. You're different every day, you know. Your practice is different,
Yeah.
Some days it's beautiful and perfect, and other days it's not. Other days it's a ball of shit.
And do you
like the river in summer and winter,
Do you ball of shit. Do you have any regular sort of, let's say, spiritual or religious practice that you do that you might be able to share with us? Do you meditate? Do you pray to any Shiva gods? Do you do anything? Have you come out of this?
There's no goat sacrifice.
No, any goat, yeah.
I'm very structured in a lot of ways. Yeah. So like every single night before I go to bed, I did this before, everything happened, and I do it still consistently. And every single morning I go, oh look, I'm alive again. I literally say that to myself because I'm very often surprised when I wake up.
You genuinely saying that you when your feet hit the ground?
No, 100%. Before, when I wake up, I open my eyes and I kind of feel my body in a sense, and I go, wow, yeah, I'm alive. And that's it's just a single kind of felt understanding I have every single morning. It's automatic. It's actually
quite a powerful practice, isn't it? To take that moment and to put your 2 feet on the ground. And the reason I asked you that is because I heard a comedian doing it years ago. I don't know if you ever heard of Joey Diaz, the comedian. He's great. And I remember he's just a fucking animal, like a lunatic, right? Nutcase, right? And he's like, man, he snorted so much coke and did so much things, he should have been dead. And then he had a kid in his 50s, and he's like, and he said the very same thing as you. He said, and he said it on many different podcasts. He said, like, his 2 feet hit the ground, and he goes, fuck, I'm alive today. Thank God. Thank all the gods. And it's not a bad way to start your day. I've done it a few times where I get up and I go, fuck, it is good to be alive. Like, it is good that your 2 feet hit that ground. Like, it's
I think it's the single most important thing, because again, like, I've been really sick lately, up to again the day after Patrick's Day, I had another massive heart attack.
This year?
This year, yeah. That was the first time I was really consciously kind of worried, because I felt so weak. I felt my heart nearly stopped like a couple of times. And it didn't come back and go boom, 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 boom. It wasn't like this fight. Yeah. Like I felt I had nothing physically, and I was really sick for about 2 months, I'd say. I've had a problem with my lungs filling with fluid, and I couldn't. Again, walking 400 meters was hard. I was really sick. I was so weak. My phone felt heavy in my hand. If you can imagine what your phone feels like, my phone felt heavy in my hand. And I could dead 240 kilos before, comfortably, and do like a 64 kilo weighted pull up, I'm pretty solid.
How big? Like self-interest. How tall and big are you?
I'm 6'2".
Yeah.
And when I'm healthy, I'm like, I said, before I got sick, I was 88 kilos. I'm walking around now, I'm only 80 kilos. Before I got sick in February, I was like 84, 85 again, and I was training pretty consistently. I train lighter now. I don't lift it heavy anymore. But still, like, I could still knock out 15 pull-ups, no problem, strict dead hang pull-ups. So I'm reasonably capable. But across that period, there's this, you constantly have to readjust mentally. When I couldn't stand up for long, I was like, okay, look, there's air in my lungs and my heart's beating. And that's enough right now. You have to bring yourself down to that lowest. I mean, Lao Tzu said it perfectly, like, seek the lowest level which men are poor. And that's like to bring yourself physically and psychologically down to that beginner level, because like every night, again, from that practice standpoint, every night when I go to sleep, I hate this word gratitude and the way it's put out now, it's lost that meaning, but like I'm grateful for, and I kind of go through, like, I'm grateful that I'm loved. Yeah. It's like I spend my day fighting my bloody kids off, hugging me and kissing me. Like, I'm more loved than I could ever imagine have been when I was younger. My wife, my kids, they deeply, genuinely love me, and I'm more loved than I could ever have imagined. And there's people in the world that aren't loved. I lie there and I think I feel warm, like I'm warm and I'm safe now. And there's people in the world who aren't warm and safe. I say I'm grateful for, like, I've eaten more food than I could possibly imagine. Right? Like, if I want to eat 10,000 calories in a day, I will. Yeah. There's people who can't do that.
Mm.
And I don't just, again, we have to get the language. You got to feel it. Like, when I'm lying there and I'm thinking like I am more loved, I feel that sense of love. When I'm there, I feel warm and safe. Like, I feel the warmth. I'm in this lovely bed. I've got a nice house in the country. I feel that. It's just felt reality.
Mm.
And when I think about the food as well, like, I'm full. Like, I eat really well, and then I cook, and I feel that. And every single day I do that, going to bed. And then every morning, like I said, I just have that one question. I open my eyes. When you're awake behind your eyes, I go, oh,
Yeah.
like, I'm a little bit surprised. I go, cool. And then in the morning time, I always, I practice Qigong every day. I meditate twice a day. I do yoga most days. I have to do a lot now, like, especially I'm only a bit more balanced now in the past few weeks, really, than I have been for months. So I have to maintain that. It takes a lot of, there's working in, there's working out, like, I'm in a working in phase where everything is input. I'm moving. I'm not fucking training. I'm moving. So I'm doing light exercise, but still very little. But I'm meditating nearly always twice a day. I'm doing Qigongs every day. I do some form of stretching or something as well. And that way, then, that again, it's just a constantly, how do I reset my mind? How do I reset my perspective? And how do I kind of, nourish my body as much as possible in that regard, So yeah, I'm really structured in that way. I've always been really structured around training. I'm highly structured around work. But then, like I said, I don't kind of internalize that, because again, practice, like, why are we practicing? What are we practicing? We're not trying to practice to get better, but trying to practice and re-hone, refocus to where am I now? Not trying to change it. This is like the fundamental thing through any kind of real practice. I can only really change and influence where I am. And I'm always mentally trying to get away from there. Yeah, we're always trying to not, get better, be different, learn more, something. But can I do that with an understanding of where I am, a real in-depth understanding of where I am mentally, physically, emotionally? And especially if you're capable, and then you're not capable. Like, I haven't been this weak since I was a teenager. It's like, I can't do basic shit sometimes, but I'm not, I don't hide from that.
Yeah.
Because if I know that, I can act on it. But if I'm trying to act like I'm not like that, I'm losing. I'm not going to be able to really affect change there. So that is a psychological. Yeah, there has to have physically and mentally. Where am I now? And to not try and change that first. Yeah. That's a different kind of practice. Yeah. And that's what I practice. And that's what I call that kind of now and being the now, all that kind of thinking. Yeah, there is an element of that but it's not in that way. It's not for that,
Yeah.
Sometimes. Right.
Oh, sorry. I was only going to say, like, a common theme that seems to have been a strong realization from a lot that you said today is, like, there's a line that keeps popping up in my head from Carl Jung, where he says, like, what you most need to find is where you least want to look. And this seems like a really common theme amongst that, your capacity for I don't know what you call it, self-acceptance and situational acceptance is dependent on your ability to confront that which is otherwise uncomfortable and to accept it as all part of the experience, as all part of the whole, as all part of the self, whatever the self is, it's all there. You know, it's like that direct capacity to confront the existence of the shadow, the components that we don't want to acknowledge, that we'd rather ignore, that make us uncomfortable to acknowledge. And that capacity to go where you least want to look is where you're going to find what you most need to find. And then it's in there. That's like that's that capacity, and that's, you know, that just keeps popping up in my head when it's so often with what you're saying.
And, you know, because that's, again, like it's not easy, you know, like it's not comfortable, you know, like I deeply love my children and deeply love my family. And, you know, I have to constantly come to a point, you know, bring myself there psychologically, you know, sometimes I'm not going to see, you know, that the real possibility is I'm not going to see my daughters, you know, grow up, or I'm not going to see my son, you know, I'm not going to see my grandkids. You know, you can't play around with that. You have to own that, because, you know, I think maybe it's part of the theme of your kind of whole podcast. If we don't have an understanding of death, if we don't accept it, we hide from the responsibility to live properly. Most people aren't afraid of dying because they haven't got a fucking clue what dying is. They're afraid of responsibility. If you live with the understanding that you are going to die, that the shadow is just beyond what you can see, because it is, you are forced into a deep responsibility to live properly now. There is no more time. There is no time, okay? You're only putting shit off. You have to come to the understanding that is deeply there right now. And it isn't, the teacher is my daughter who's crying and upset. The teacher is my son who's like, blah, 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 in my face constantly. That's the teacher. That's the moment. And I have to approach that properly, yeah? Because that's the same as watching the sunrise, and I feel this deep connection to the fucking earth. You know, they are real, but so is this shit. So is the emotionally hard things that we're always trying to get away from. And that, like, when you understand that there is this nothingness, there's nothingness, it forces you into being responsible now. I have to be responsible today. I've got to act appropriate today.
It's very...
That's awesome.
It's very interesting what you say, Colin, because myself and Ciaran have spoken about this maybe on one of our first podcasts, or maybe on one that's going to come out. I can't remember. We've recorded a bunch already, but Ciaran has spoken about doing DMT, and I've spoken about doing meditation. And I interviewed a guy recently about the differences between meditation, microdosing, yoga, and so on, and what actually was the difference when they looked at it from a scientific perspective in this retrospective analysis. And basically there was fuck all difference, really. The people that were doing yoga or meditation were having these psychedelic type of experiences without using substances. But the words that you're saying are the words that Ciaran and I have used before as well. And maybe it is a similar language, or maybe it's nothing, but it's around that word nothing. I remember like having those experiences meditating when I was doing lots of meditation, where I was like, I felt like I was everything and nothing. And whilst there was colors and visions on the way to that, when I got there, I was nothing, but it was peaceful and I felt right. And I felt like it was the place I came from and it was the place I was going. But I felt disintegrated. I felt completely merged with whatever it is, like the Tao or God or the One or whatever it is. And it's very interesting to hear you say some of the words that are very similar to it. And it's, yeah, and I know Ciaran's had his own experiences as well. So it's very interesting. And I wonder, is meditation and these psychedelic substances on this planet preparation for that? I also wonder, is sleep that we do every night a preparation for death? And as a sleep scientist, we don't talk about that. And I probably get my ticket taken off me for talking about that as a heretic. But I often...
There's something I'd love to ask you about that, actually, if you don't mind. Sorry to interrupt you.
Yeah, I wonder if that's if these are all precursors to it. In other words, you talked about working out and working in. You've actually just stimulated something in my head to this evening, which is I wonder is the meditation and the psychedelics the working in, and the going to sleep is the working out for death.
Because when I'm like a super sleeper, and like I'm like in intensive care, wired up to everything.
Yeah.
I sleep, and the nurses will come over and go like no one's, we'd never see anyone sleep like here, because there's so much noise. But for like, I was sick without knowing it for about a year before the first thing happened. And I didn't dream, or like, obviously I dreamt, I didn't remember a single dream for all that year. There was like this no feeling, it was like my body was kind of almost maybe shutting down or something, That night I had vivid, massive dreams, and I have like really lucid dreams, but for that year, nothing.
Yep.
I had really, really deep conscious dreams all the time. And that night, after the first massive heart attack, like I dreamt massively and really vividly, and pretty much have, consistently since then, but it's something I never understood because, I track my sleep and everything. I get 2.5 hours deep sleep, and I load the REM or whatever, and I sleep really well. I think it's my superpower, really. It's kind of why I'm still alive, I think. But I really fascinated. So, like, have you come across that? The lack of remembrance.
Yeah. I've come across it not from the death process, we'll say, if you want to call it that. But I have come across it from what's called REM rebound. So people who have undergone big periods of what we call, so you got like stages wake, stages 1, 2, and 3. 1 and 2 being light sleep, 3 being deep sleep, and REM being dreaming sleep. And so the only way to really measure that is in a laboratory. Those trackable wearable devices you have are basically
they're only
they're just shit, really, just gimmicky. But anyway, and so people who have like sleep apnea, classically the big fat heavy people are not getting oxygen, have high rates of sleep apnea, will have diminished REM sleep, and that's generally supposed to be about 20% of the night's sleep. So they will have like less REM because it'll be harder for them to get down into REM. And so what happens then when people are put on CPAP, which is like a forced oxygen therapy, or to lose lots of weight, they have what's called REM rebound. And this happens with people who are long-term drug users as well. So people who smoke copious amounts of pot. And these days, because everybody's listening to Joe Rogan, and seemingly Joe Rogan's a professor and everything. But anyway, people are smoking pot to go to sleep. And then what's happening is...
Of course, it's inhibiting their REM, isn't it?
Exactly, yeah. And so what happens then is people who've been long-term pot smokers, when they get off it, then they have these like crazy dreams. And what do they do? Fuck it, I'm going back on the pot. I can't sleep with all these dreams. So they get themselves into this vicious cycle. So I would suspect, and I'm going to actually ask a few other colleagues about this tomorrow, but I would suspect what you have is, I'm not sure what the mechanism why you weren't having REM, but I'll try and find out. But I think what you've experienced here is what's called REM rebound. So once you get back to it, and was able to, your body wants to bring it back. REM sleep, the body will always prioritize REM sleep over non-REM sleep because it'll kind of, the brain is like the software.
Yeah.
And the body's the hardware. So it'll keep the software updated before the body. So I'm not surprised if you had REM rebound for a number of weeks or months.
Oh, that's fascinating. That makes so much sense because, again, it happened this time. I was really not having any rememberable dreams anyway. And then as I've gotten better in the past few weeks, really, really deep but vivid stuff, so fascinating, brilliant. Thank you.
Yeah. And on the topics of dreams, Ciaran, before I forget, ever since you and I, Ciaran, have started this podcast, since I started reading Jung and reading philosophy every day and doing yoga nearly every day, my dreams have gone fucking crazy. My dreams have gone off the wall, like completely off the wall. So we should talk about that, Ciaran, another day, because I had a dream within a dream within a dream this week. Fucking
have you ever
freaked me out. I don't even know if I'm back from it yet. I could still be in it.
When it comes to, that kind of lucid style dreaming, and what I noticed when, because I've gone through different periods, again, there's different intensities of things. And when I was doing a particular period of my training, which had a huge amount of qigong and meditation and so on, a couple of years ago, maybe 7-8 years ago now, I was having really, really vivid, lucid dreams. And it occurred to me then in my dream, because I was dreaming, I still remember very clearly, because it was the first time I was able to control my dream. I was going over a waterfall in the dream, right? This is a kind of recurring thing at the time. And going over the waterfall, all of a sudden I stopped in the dream, obviously. And then I, while asleep, consciously felt and understood, because this is in my dream, I am the waterfall and I am the person in the waterfall. So I can stop and start and control both of those things. It's not, this is again, subject-object kind of experience.
Yeah.
And then I was able to really control my dreams much more, for a certain period. And it's very interesting, but it was a very, very lucid thing. But it was directly tied to a very particular period of training. I don't do that. I was younger. I'm not doing that intensity of training anymore in that particular way. So it diminished over time, but it was very attached to a certain amount of output externally, But yeah, it's very interesting that, it's very reflective. Things we're doing every day has a very, very big impact for me anyway on how my mind processes stuff,
Yeah. Ciaran, do you have any questions for Colin?
Just that kind of that guttural groaning you'd mentioned earlier on, when you basically, after you came back from the dead, literally, it might be interesting if your friend PJ, if you were to find a video of someone who's after smoking 5-MeO DMT, and and you can find videos of this on YouTube. I can send you on one if you want, and you can show it to him and see, is this what it looked like when I did it? Because there's a really sometimes before my experience with 5-MeO, which is the 5-methoxydimethyltryptamine. It's the one that comes from crystallized toad venom from the Sonoran desert toad. Yeah. And one of the things that I'd learned beforehand, before going into this experience, and I did a load of prep beforehand, like years of meditation. And then when the stars aligned and it was time to do it, it was a good circumstances, good facilitators that we trusted, good people. Everything was right. It was like there was nothing haphazard about this in any way. And that's part of my hesitation to even talk about this publicly, is because these are
context is everything.
Need to be taken very seriously. This isn't something
very seriously.
There's nothing party drug about this. There's nothing
not at all
about it at all. So within that, so one of the things I'd learned beforehand was that, and I found this quite odd, quite strange. And I'd had experiences like Ian had described of a loss of sense of self or memory of self, and this simultaneous experience of merger with the environment, with everything all at once. This real embodied feeling of that, but not even being aware that there was a me prior to the merger. Through meditation, these experiences that I had a handful of times prior to this. But anyway, but this was very different. And one of the things I'd learned beforehand was that the way that it was described in a really good resource that a friend of mine sent me on was that the guy basically described it as, it feels like you're dying. And I was like, I remember thinking, how the fuck could I know what it feels like to die? And how many people know what it feels like to die, really, that have also smoked toad venom afterwards and go say, you know what? Yeah, this was like
there's a real coordination there in the experience.
Yeah. Like based on what, like that's an interesting claim,
It tastes like chicken.
I've never eaten chicken, but then in the actual experience, I won't go into the whole deep rigmarole. Maybe that'd be a chat for another day. But basically, after hitting the pipe, there's a feeling of going away, almost like coming out, like going out the back of the head. From what I remember, and there's a feeling of like familiarity, but not like, it wasn't like sleep, like it was different. This was a feeling of like almost like the shutters are going down, like Like it's like the irises are closing and I'm going out the back of my head. It's like going back and down or whatever. But there was a familiarity to it that actually is like, oh yeah, this is feeling like dying. This is what it feels like. It's grand. And then you're out there. Next thing it's like, but the whole concept with it is this word surrender is this really important concept. All these psychedelics is surrender is key, not putting up, not trying to fight it, which in itself is a bit of a paradox where you're trying to fight your desire to fight. So by consciously trying to surrender, you're actually trying to do something, which in itself is a bit of a paradox in there when you're trying to actually surrender, but but anyway, if you can actually embody that and you can feel it. So that's why the preparation can be really key of meditating on surrender and meditating on just letting go and releasing control, etc. And really, but what's interesting is I did this by myself. So I was with other people, but we all went away separately to do it in this particular location. We went off into the woods in this kind of ceremonial area. And so I was me and 3 facilitators. And so my friend who I did it with at the time he did it after me later on in the day. And I didn't know. So I purposefully didn't look up any videos or didn't look up anything about it really in terms of what it looked like. I just did my own meditation that I was doing anyway, and then added to it and then just followed through on some of the guidance that I'd received in terms of preparation. But months later, I went online and I ended up just got really interested in research and the whole rigmarole around that might be a topic for another day because if you're ever interested. But months later, I looked back on some videos on YouTube of people after they came basically who had smoked it. And there's this, it was like there was an awareness when I was watching it that that's what I did as well, but I don't remember having done it, which was this weird exorcism looking movement and this guttural groaning sounds that I don't even know if I could recreate now, that were like
fascinating,
contortion-y and everything. And then and this feeling like you were describing it of like coming up through something and coming up back into almost like my body coming back into my body and coming up through is the way to think of it. Up through. Exactly. Yeah, it's up. It's almost like coming up. Yeah, that's what it is. It's an up. But then the feeling of lying there and having and not really knowing what's going on, and then having a split second realization, oh, I'm on the ground. Oh yeah, I recognize this fella. I recognize her. And then like, well, this, and then the facilitator put his hand out to help me up. And then none of my limbs worked. And then there was a feeling of, what the fuck? But it was all really pleasant at this stage. Mm-hmm. And then there was definitely some unbelievable hardship in there at a different point. But at this point, and then I was trying to get my arm to lift off the ground. And I was just looking at this hand and then trying to entice my arm to go to the hand. And then eventually it was almost like feeling electrical activity pass back through my arm to be able to lift it up, to then be able to lift this arm up and actually be able to control it. And then having these jelly legs that didn't work. And then the 3 of them helped me up off the ground and hold me and squeeze me in this position. It's all the feeling of acceptance and love that comes with this is astronomical, indescribable, but again, this is on the other side of a lot of resistance. It's not all fucking sunshine and rainbows with this substance. So, but so much of what you described earlier on just sounded so similar.
Wow, that is incredibly similar. That is absolutely fascinating. That's amazing now, because there's just it's so similar. I must look it up because again, I can still, I don't talk about this a lot, barely at all. But like as we've had this conversation, I can I've really re-experienced bits of it. I paint my head area and stuff, and I can just a little bit of a, I've never really, it's been a long time since I've talked about that first time, and I can almost feel the shadow of it, and it's very, very similar to what you're saying there, and it's weird because again, to kind of process these things and go through these things, it like, again, when you talk about that Zen kind of thing, and being in the moment, and like, sometimes the moment isn't nice, sometimes now is shit, sometimes now is really painful. Sometimes you're experiencing things that are terrible. Sometimes you're reliving things that are really hard. But like, that's where it matters, like you said, it is like what you're looking for is where you at least want to look, and I have to, when those things come up in my mind and in my body, I don't fight it. I try. Again, there's another way to practice that acceptance of it, and especially lately, because lately I found it the hardest, because I was sick for so long there, weeks, and I had a real kind of almost post-traumatic stress from it. Like when I was in hospital, he died again at least twice, I'd say, when I was like just slowly suffocating. Horrible, the most, on this edge, this horizon, like this thin line of like just not suffocating. And it's really, really fucking hard. That's a really hard place to be. Like that really broke me physically, I had to find a different level of acceptance with that, because I was so weak. I couldn't, I had to go back in my mind. I had to go back to my childhood and my father, and, draw strength from that. Like I had nothing left to give mentally, emotionally, or physically. Like, it was really, really hard. And in those moments, it's my father that came to me. It's the strength my father had, all the things, like stuff my dad went through and how he was brought up. It's amazing he turned out some way normal. It'll be on all over the news now. He had this horrendously hard life as a child, and it kept coming to me, like, if Eddie can do it, my friend Dad, if Eddie can come through that, I can do this. His genes flow in me. His blood flows in me. If I have nothing left to give, I'm kind of going to rely on that in a way, because I was just so horribly beaten down by it. And that's come to me a lot as I've gotten better and I feel better. That those imagery and those moments have come to me in real time, and to not move away from it, like to stay with that and accept it and feel it, but don't let it become the dominant feeling. That's the difference. You to experience it and not to become the dominant feeling or the dominant thought. And that's the same as I listen to you talk about that. It brings up those things from before, but it's more like a shadow than a dominant experience. But like that's where they don't talk about that in your meditation class or your meditation app, or they don't talk about, no, like, this is not easy, this is painful, this is hard, and although I don't buy the Christian version of suffering, at all costs, just suffer more, there is an element of accepting and owning, taking responsibility for that feeling, that suffering, because you realize I'm separate from it. And you realize that I am not that. And you realize my perception, my awareness is separate from that. And in that moment of understanding, that in real time, not in language, in real time, there's an understanding that I am separate from that. So then there's no sense of self in it. Like, that is such a strong thing. There's such a strong teacher, and such a strong experience, But like that can happen. Like I'm walking around Duns and that's fucking happening. Like, this is not, this is not shit that like I'm sitting on a fucking mountaintop. It's like I'm walking around Duns, I'm shopping, and then I start having these really, sick flashbacks. It's like, it intrudes in the logistics of everyday life. You know what I mean? Like, it's not like just in some deep meditation.
So, you're not on a robe enlightened on the side of a hill. Yeah.
No, you're not
Yeah.
fucking there like with water flowing in the background in a bowl, you know. And like that's if we take away anything from the conversation, or when I try and talk to clients as well, you know, it's again closing the loop on it. Like it's where the rubber meets the road. It's in real life.
Yeah.
You know, like I said, it's in Duns, it's waking up first thing in the morning. It's in real time. And it's how do I frame and process in real time? And how do I not let it become the negative thing to the dominant thing? And like, that's a skill set. You know, that's like being a sailor. You know, one of my favorite sayings in the whole world is it's attributed to some African proverb, but I don't know if that's true. But like, smooth seas do not make skillful sailors. And it's like the simplest way of having it. You know, like, I can't rely on some external set of environmental situational consequences. It all has to be internal. You know, I have to be able to sail, and whatever the weather brings and whatever that happens, it's up to me to tack my sails to it. You know, it's not like, oh look, it's going the wrong fucking direction. You know, like it does not work like that. You know, and like unfortunately, that is the model that young people have now. You know, is like, oh look, this isn't how I want it to be. You're not calling me the right fucking pronoun or something. And so now the world has to change. And like, we're just robbing people, robbing them of the ability to grow and develop.
Yeah.
You know, it's hard to watch.
Yeah.
You know, it's like I'm nothing special. I'm some kid from Colony Park. Okay. Like there's nothing special. Yeah. I just done work in real time, and I have a lot of peace in my life from that. You know, I could leave life now and be happy. There's not many people can say that. There's not many people don't have to hide. I don't have to hide. I know who I am. I know where I am. And there is such energy from that. There's such power. That means nothing to anybody else. Like it doesn't, no one else cares. But that is a felt reality in my life every day. Like that's different. Yeah, I did that. I gave myself that. No one gave me that. I did it. And no one can take it. Not even dying. No one can take that from me. We're robbing everyday people from that these days, you know?
I think that's a great segue to the end. And I just want to say this episode will be called "You Are Rushing Towards Nothingness." That's what this episode will be titled. And I think that's a great way to finish.
Thank you, guys.
And I want to just hang on the line for a minute, Colin, because I want to just say a quote as well that was quite apt for before this podcast started. I've been watching this documentary. Now, there's not much words in it. You might want to check it out. It's called Zen for Nothing. And it's interesting that I was watching this evening before we started talking about nothingness. Zen for Nothing. It's a lady who goes to Japan and stays in a monastery for a full year without any meditation experiences. About 20 minutes into it, but I heard a great quote at the start. The guy was reading out in Japanese, but the subtitles in English said, I once knew a man who said he was immortal, but he has been dead for a long time now.